Thanks very much, Sharon. I just want to welcome all our guests and thank them very much for their time and indeed the report, which I read last night. Just a couple of issues, I suppose. Pauline, I think it was yourself that spoke about worth and value, and I deal with carers allowance on a daily basis, and I think the last statistic I had was 77% of those on carers are actually women, and a lot of those women tell me that they feel degraded, they feel that they're not worth anything basically in this particular system. And I know the means test, and it's something I've spoken to Catherine previously on, and we had a commencement matter in the Shannon recently on the whole carers experience. But just on the fact that so many women, 77%, did that come through in your study, the effect of that is affecting obviously women in more than any other gender, obviously. Just again, Pauline, just one mention. You mentioned the form. You mentioned I didn't pick up the country. You mentioned which had a 4-page form. When I deal with carers allowance, and I say I deal with it very regularly almost on a daily basis. We had a 34-page form. It's now 28 pages. To me, it's way too prescriptive, it's way too much, and it's off-putting. And I think that's the big question. I know many of you said that. It's off-putting for people for filling out 28 pages. So again, have you looked at that as part of the report and the 4 pages versus the 28 pages? What's the difference between 4 pages and 28 pages? Because it's something that I deal with on a day. And I suppose the big thing then is that those that get refused carers allowance and don't appeal, and it's something again I come across on a too regular basis, unfortunately. And they just don't think, they don't have the time, first of all, because they're caring 24/7, and they just don't feel it's worthwhile for actually appealing it. And it is worthwhile because you actually, and I've said this before many times at this committee, the whole idea of oral hearings and actually getting in front of an inspector and telling them exactly what you're doing on a 24/7 basis and putting that human story across rather than putting a third, or as it is now, a 28-page form across. It must be done and must continue to be done. And again, has there been any in your findings in relation to the amount of people, why more people don't actually appeal a carers allowance? I suppose a big issue that's been touched on as well this morning on carers allowance is those that are over 65, and I'm dealing with a lot of people at the moment, and I think it's one in 5, I think again the last statistics that we had are actually over 65, and the big worry that they have that who's going to look after their loved one when they're no longer here, and it's a huge worry. And we go back to what Family Carers Ireland continue to say every time I meet them, the 20 billion that's been saved by the state. For me, the state need to recognise that. They need to recognise the fact that that 20 billion is there. And when we talk about the 397 million that it will cost to abolish the means test, then it's something obviously we've supported. And as well as that, Deputy Queeve was right, the Big Bang theory versus the instalment. And I know Family Carers Ireland have the instalments over a period of time. And thankfully, and let's thank the 900 that was announced yesterday is a step in that direction. There's absolutely no doubt about that. Just one case I'm dealing with at the moment, who's, again, a lady whose husband is a guard down the country, not in my own area, and she's distraught because she cannot qualify for carers. She doesn't understand that she's caring for her child, like yourself, Emily, 24/7, and she's just been told and refused carers allowance within the last 2 months because she's over the limit. And, you know, until yesterday I couldn't go back to her because I didn't know where the new boundary was going to be, but I'm sure it'll help her a small little bit, but not to the extent it should be. So we welcome the means test and that the difference and trying to abolish it, and yesterday was a step in that direction. The carers benefit, you're right, Emily. Again, it's only for a certain cohort of people. I would welcome the fact that it goes to 5 years as well, but it's only going to affect a certain cohort of people because at the end of the day, I always refer to the fact that this 20 billion has to be reflected in the people that we're looking after. And I suppose just to finish, Chair, for the moment, the issue that I get, and I go back to the worth and value, and every time I get somebody who has been turned down for a carers allowance, and there's too many of them, that is their statement. That is what they tell me, is that do this state not value what I'm doing for them? Because obviously if they're not looking after that loved one, they're going to end up in state care, and that's something that we don't want and no state wants, because at the end of the day, and I don't even want to go into housing adoption grants, which is crazy at the moment as well. In my own area in Kildare, you know, the issues that are being brought up against families trying to apply for those at the moment, and I continue to ask for that housing adoption grant to be changed. But I suppose the issue here is that we have to I don't want to use the word reward, recognise is the word I will use, those that are going above and beyond to look after their loved ones, something that they want to do, and that's always has got to be said, but they feel that their worth and value has been not recognised by the state at the moment, and it's something we need to do more of. And I just welcome the report from Maynooth University, and just, you know, if there were some replies to those few queries. Thanks, Chair.
I'm just very briefly, Dr. Peace. Thank you. Absolutely. I mean, I think the participants, particularly the women participants, were very sensitive to the issue, but that the means test, the household mean test, was deeply gendered in its logic. And the notion is, of course, that the policy and the way in which it's administered in itself is reinforcing deep gendered assumptions about who should care. The gender pay gap, obviously, is an external structural issue as well. That means women will care. So there was a great sensitivity to that this was considered to be the normal, natural function of women. Now, not to say there aren't male carers, but this is a predominantly female phenomenon for sure. So that was definitely came across in the research as a very clear outcome in that sense. And I suppose the value of that feminist ethics of care approach we took was to really surface that in real ways, and also to make the analysis not a kind of a sentimentalised vocational notion of care, but to raise the issue of its social value. Because it's deeply feminised, its value is very low. And we know that from looking in the formal workforce, as soon as an occupation becomes feminised, its value is lowered. So that certainly is something we were keenly aware of, and it connects to our broader, I suppose, intent to make sure that any changes that happen surface equality proofing and are very sensitive to the issue of how this can also improve gender equality outcomes and gender justice outcomes as well. I might hand over to Mary to respond.
Yeah, just to, I mean, I think you were welcoming the report and that focus on abolishing the means test. And I suppose just to really emphasise that, you know, you don't just bring in a wider group of people who become eligible when you abolish the means test. You also abolish the demeaning process and you abolish the administration cost. So it's actually good value for that cost of 397 million. And I just wanted to really put on record quite firmly, because there has been mooted other costs, like the 1.2 million that a couple of people mentioned. That 1.2 million came from an assessment which was based on if everybody who was said to be a carer automatically got carers, like the money. And that's not what we're proposing. Let us be really, really, really clear. We're proposing no means test, but quite stringent medical and carer process. So it's important to do that, yeah.
And it's just in relation to what you said, and I take what you said, but just in relation to the whole medical assessment, where are you with that assessment? Are you proposing or looking at changes? Do you think it's fit for purpose at the moment? And maybe to comment, that was something I wanted to follow up on, and you've just mentioned it again. So just, I know you're not saying to give carers allowance carte blanche to everybody. So where are you, I suppose, in your research with the whole medical assessment?
Yeah, I mean, it falls into the recommendation we have for the navigational group. The research threw up quite a bit about the medical assessment in terms of the process. For example, the do not review we mentioned earlier as an example of how it could be improved. There are issues even from the point of view of the medical profession in relation to their engagement and their capacity to engage with it. There's repeated forms that need to be filled in when they're already filled in. There's government policy already on reusing existing administrative data from one department to another. So we see a number of ways that the medical review process could be made more streamlined, made more efficient and more effective, and that would be the focus of looking at it in the navigational group. But that doesn't, but we still would insist it is necessary to have a medical assessment of eligibility, and that is the way that you put the boundaries around the number of people who would be eligible for a payment, and that the costing therefore is 397, not the exaggerated cost that was put out as maybe a political distraction at some level. I think that's really important to see that the costing is grounded in the Parliamentary Budget Office assessment of what the cost would be.
Fox.
Mark, you asked why don't people appeal? Honestly, I'd say because it's soul destroying and they're exhausted. And, you know, carers have to fight for everything. And we talk about this, you know, from assessments to interventions to education to transition to adult services. And then on top of that, they're being asked to go through this process and appeal, you know, so quite often they're just exhausted and they give up the fight, you know, which in itself just shows. And on the medical report, yeah, we absolutely believe a review is required. Parents tell us about how they feel guilty. They're almost having to say what their child's worst days are in order to get recognised and, you know, paid, which in itself, you know, shouldn't be the case. Sometimes they want to talk about the good things that happen and, you know, but they can't, because if they do, they'll be turned down. So we absolutely need to look at the medical form. If they can do it in other countries, 4 pages, why can't we do that here? And that should form part of what this committee looks at.
Things, the 4 pages in Finland, the difference between the Irish and the Finland forms is that the Finland just ask a, you know, basic kind of name, address, name of child, or name of person being cared for, and all of the medical stuff is done by a medical professional or a social care professional. So the parents don't have to deal with it, or the person providing the care doesn't have to deal with it. And then just to come back in terms of the adequacy versus eligibility question, I think it's also important, and this came across in all of the interviews, that when carers are refused the carers allowance due to the means test, it's incredibly devaluing to them, incredibly degrading to them. So abolishing the means test provides recognition for the care work that they're doing, that the vital care work that they're doing, which all of the carers really emphasised in the interviews.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Senator.